everyone! In this video, we're walking through every question in Module 1 of Practice Test number 10. That's 25 questions. For each one, I'll read the passage, show the question, pause so you can think, then walk through every wrong answer and finish with the correct one. Question 1 of 25. We're jumping straight in with a medium. This passage is titled Coral Reef Recovery. The passage describes Eiko Tanaka's survey of 3 Norwegian fjords, where trawled zones lost 78% of coral cover in 12 years, while protected zones gained a bit. The stem asks which choice best states the main idea of the text. We need the option that captures both halves of Tanaka's argument. Trawling causes severe damage, and recovery is glacially slow because Lophelia pertusa grows under 2 millimeters per year. Choices that focus on the study site, overreach to every measurable way, or rank coral species miss that combined claim. Choice B treats the fjords as the topic, but they are merely the study site, and the passage never ranks reefs globally. Choice C overstates the evidence with every measurable way when only coral cover is compared between trawled and protected zones. Choice D recasts Lophelia's slow growth as a species ranking, but the passage cites that growth rate to explain slow recovery, not to label it the most vulnerable coral. Choice A is correct because it joins the cause, bottom trawl fishing damages reefs, with the consequence, Lophelia's slow growth means centuries-long recovery. That mirrors the passage's two-part structure exactly, where the 78% drop establishes harm and the 2 millimeters per year figure establishes timescale. Question 2 of 25, still in medium territory. This passage is titled Mosuo Kinship. The passage centers on anthropologist Cho Wei's objection to calling the Mosuo a matriarchy. While property and household leadership pass through women, political authority has historically rested with male councils. The question asks which choice best states the main idea of the text. Because this is a main idea question, the right answer must capture Cho's central claim, that economic and political power are distributed differently among the Mosuo, rather than a supporting fact or an unrelated generalization. Choice B is a supporting detail about matrilineal property, not the passage's argument about labeling. Choice C overreaches by indicting media coverage of indigenous societies in general when the text critiques only one specific label. Choice D invents a causal claim the passage never makes. Cho argues the term misleads outside observers, not that dropping it would increase Mosuo women's political power. Choice nails the central argument. Cho Wei contends that matriarchy misrepresents the Mosuo because their system separates economic power, held by women, from political power, held by male councils. That distinction is exactly what the passage says the label obscures. Question 3 of 25. Now it gets harder. This passage is titled Plastic-Eating Bacteria. The question asks for the main idea of a passage about Ideonella sakayensis, a bacterium discovered in 2016 that breaks down PET plastic. Engineer Rashid Patel argues against treating it as a real solution to plastic pollution. The choices split between a summary of Patel's full argument, a background fact about the 2016 discovery, a claim that Patel disputes the original finding, and a verdict comparing chemical recycling to plastic accumulation. B states background context about media attention since 2016, but that framing only sets up Patel's argument rather than expressing it. C misreads the passage. Patel never disputes that isocansis breaks down PET, he disputes that it can do so at useful scale. D introduces a comparison between industrial chemical recycling and letting plastic accumulate, which the passage never makes. Energy costs appear only as a caveat against scaling the bacterial reaction. Choice A captures the passage's central claim. Patel offers 3 concrete limits: the 6-week consumption rate for a tiny PET fragment, the bacterium's inability to metabolize the other 6 common plastics, and the environmental cost of the energy needed to scale up. All 3 converge on the conclusion that isocansis is not a plausible large-scale fix. Question 4 of 25, a medium after that. This passage is titled Phones and Adolescent Sleep. The passage reports a finding from sleep researcher Lena Hoffman. Adolescents using smartphones near bedtime fall asleep about 39 minutes later, But she cautions against reading this as causal because anxiety, not screen light, might be the real driver. The question asks which choice best states the main idea. A main idea answer must capture both halves of the passage, the documented association and Hoffman's warning that the cause cannot be pinned on the phones themselves. We should look for a choice that holds those two ideas together without overstating either. B treats anxiety in social media users as an established conclusion, but the passage only floats it as a hypothetical alternative. C introduces policy implications that the text never raises. D claims anxiety has been definitively identified as the cause, which directly contradicts Hoffman's careful presentation of anxiety as a possible confounder, not a confirmed driver. Choice A captures exactly that tension. It acknowledges a real association between bedtime phone use and delayed sleep, while noting that the data cannot isolate phone light as the cause. That mirrors Hoffman's own framing, a correlation worth reporting, paired with an explicit caution about confounding factors like anxiety. Question 5 of 25. Now it gets harder. This passage is titled Mohenjo-Daro Governance. The passage describes Mohenjo-Daro, an Indus Valley city long called a mystery because it lacks palaces and temples. Archaeologist Priya Menon argues that label says more about Western expectations than about the city itself, pointing to standardized bricks, drainage, and weights as proof of coordinated governance. The question asks which choice best captures the main idea. A main idea answer has to cover both halves of Menon's argument. The city was clearly governed, and the mystery framing reflects a bias toward visible monuments. Choices that only repeat background facts or stretch the claim into a broad generalization will fall short. B reports a setup detail about missing palaces and temples, but that is the puzzle Menon is responding to, not her argument. C generalizes standardized infrastructure into a universal rule about ancient cities, while the passage applies the evidence only to Mohenjo-Daro. D widens the critique to all South Asian civilizations, but Menon targets one specific framing of one city, not a sweeping pattern. Choice A captures both moves precisely. It states that Mohenjo-Daro was clearly governed, matching Menon's claim about coordinated infrastructure, and it identifies the mystery label as a bias toward monumental displays of power, which is exactly the framing problem she diagnoses. Question 6 of 25. A medium after that. This passage is titled Universal Childcare Adoption. The passage presents economist Daniel Cho's hypothesis that countries adopt universal childcare after women's labor force participation has already risen sharply because politicians respond to visible constituencies rather than abstract equity arguments. The question asks which finding would most directly support that hypothesis. To support Cho, we need evidence of a prior surge in women's labor force participation preceding adoption of universal childcare, the specific temporal sequence and variable he names. Choice B reverses the timing. It documents participation rising after adoption, which speaks to effects, not the pre-adoption surge Cho describes. Choice C describes voters backing the policy on fairness grounds, but Cho explicitly rejects abstract equity arguments as the driver. Choice D points to economic growth, a different variable altogether from women's labor force participation, so it doesn't test Cho's specific claim. Choice A fits exactly. 4 European countries each saw women's labor force participation rise by more than 10 percentage points in the decade before adopting universal childcare. That pre-adoption surge is precisely the predictor Cho's hypothesis identifies, and the temporal order matches his causal claim. Question 7 of 25. Now it gets harder. This passage is titled Cousin Phyllis Imagery. The passage presents Gaskell's image of Phyllis as tall as a young poplar, but bent like one that has caught the wind, along with Nakamura's reading that this signals Phyllis will be shaped by forces she cannot resist. We need the quotation that would most directly support that interpretation. To back Nakamura, a choice must show Phyllis yielding to an external force, echoing the bent poplar in the wind. Mere references to height or to a literal tree will not suffice, and any line showing Phyllis as self-directed cuts against the claim. B only confirms Phyllis's height, missing the crucial bent by the wind element that carries Nakamura's claim. C describes a literal poplar tree on the farm, not Phyllis's response to any irresistible force. D shows Phyllis moving with certainty through the orchard, depicting her as confident and self-directed, the opposite of being shaped by forces beyond her control. Choice A fits exactly. He came at her like weather, and she gave way without a word. Literalizes weather as the force Phyllis cannot resist, mirroring the bent poplar image and confirming her yielding to outside pressure. Question 8 of 25. Another hard one. This passage is titled Tambora and Climate. The passage presents Idris Bello's claim that the 1815 Tambora eruption cooled the northern hemisphere through ocean circulation changes in addition to atmospheric aerosols. A reviewer pushes back, insisting that ocean changes unfold on decadal timescales and therefore can't explain the rapid 1816 cooling. The question asks which finding would most weaken that specific objection. To weaken the reviewer, we need evidence that ocean changes can actually happen quickly, within a year or so of the eruption, rather than over decades. Anything reinforcing aerosol explanations, eruption magnitude, or slow ocean shifts will miss the target. B addresses how long sulfate aerosols linger, which props up the aerosol-only account Bello is trying to expand beyond, leaving the timescale objection untouched. C cites eruption size, but no one is disputing how large Tambora was. The argument is about ocean response speed. D describes shifts occurring between 1820 and 1840, a decadal scale change that actually confirms the reviewer's claim rather than weakening it. Choice A delivers exactly that. Sediment records showing North Atlantic surface temperatures dropped by more than 1 degree within 12 months of Tambora. That documented sub-year ocean response directly contradicts the reviewer's decadal timescale premise and reopens space for Bello's hypothesis. Question 9 of 25. A medium after that. This passage is titled Architect Carla Veiga. The passage describes architect Carla Veiga, who designs public libraries in coastal Brazilian cities. She explains that she spends a full week walking the surrounding neighborhood before sketching anything, and she insists the building itself is the last thing she draws. The question asks what this most strongly suggests about her design philosophy. The choices range across context-driven design, community consultation, reluctance toward new projects, and prioritizing floor plans. We need the option that fits Veiga's stated practice of immersing herself in the neighborhood before drawing the building. Choice B overreaches. Walking a neighborhood is observation, not consultation, and the passage never mentions interviews or conversations with residents. Choice C invents an attitude not in the text. Nothing suggests Veiga is reluctant to take on new library projects. Choice D contradicts the passage, since Veiga delays the floor plan rather than elevating it above other design elements. Choice A is correct because Veiga delays drawing the building until she has absorbed the neighborhood, and her own words, that the building is the last thing I draw, imply that the surrounding context comes first, and the form of the building follows from it. Question 10 of 25. Now it gets harder. This passage is titled Marisol Pana's Audition. The passage describes cellist Marisol Pana choosing a slow Bach suite she learned at 8 for her Madrid conservatory audition rather than a virtuosic showpiece, and later saying she wanted the panel to hear the playing she could not hide behind. The question asks what the text suggests about her reasoning for that choice. The choices range across an honesty of exposure reading, a logistical excuse about preparation time, a claim about proving thorough childhood training, and a suggestion of ambivalence about attending at all. We need the option that captures the meaning of her quoted phrase about playing she could not hide behind. Choice B contradicts the text, which says she chose the suite deliberately, not that she lacked time for something else. Choice C shifts the emphasis to thoroughness of training or pedigree, but the passage focuses on exposure and honesty, not on proving her preparation was complete. Choice D invents ambivalence about attending the conservatory. Nothing in the passage suggests she was uncertain about enrolling. Choice A is correct. The phrase, the playing she could not hide behind, implies a piece where flashy technique offers no cover, so her musicianship would be judged plainly. A familiar, exposed, slow Bach suite serves exactly that purpose, which is what choice A names. Question 11 of 25, a medium after that. This passage is titled Wind Turbine Polymer. The passage describes engineer Theo Lindgren testing a prototype wind turbine whose blades shed less than 0.2 grams of microplastic per year in early lab tests. He has refused to share samples with 2 independent testing labs. The question asks which choice most reasonably describes a concern an outside observer might raise. The choices range from a verification concern to a claim about environmental safety thresholds to a claim about polymer failure to a sweeping statement about independent labs themselves. We need the option that follows from what the passage actually establishes. B fails because the passage offers no benchmark for judging whether 0.2 grams counts as high or low, so we cannot conclude the figure is environmentally unsafe. C contradicts the text. The polymer has not been shown to fail. Outside labs want samples precisely because results are unconfirmed. D introduces an outside generalization about independent labs' reliability that the passage never characterizes. Choice A is correct. The passage pairs early lab tests with a refusal to share blade samples with outside labs. That combination points to one clear inference. The shedding figure has not yet been independently verified, which is exactly the worry an outside observer would raise. Question 12 of 25. Another medium. This passage is titled Solar Panels and Canopy. The passage reports a study by botanist Renata Aliyev comparing leaf area index, or LAI, on urban streets with and without rooftop solar panels. The question asks what the data most directly indicate about LAI on streets that have rooftop panels. The choices split into 4 claims about the comparison. Panel streets are higher by about 0.7, panel streets are lower by about 0.7, the 2 values match exactly, or panels show no measurable effect at all. We need the option that matches the actual numbers reported. Choice B flips the direction, claiming panel streets are lower, but 4.1 exceeds 3.4. Choice C says the 2 means match exactly, which contradicts the distinct values of 3.4 and 4.1. Choice D claims no measurable effect, yet the passage records a 0.7 gap and even offers a microclimate mechanism to explain it. The text gives a mean LAI of 3.4 for streets without panels and 4.1 for streets with them. Subtracting yields a difference of 0.7, with the panel having streets coming in higher. Choice A captures both the direction and the magnitude of that gap precisely. Question 13 of 25. Now it gets harder. This passage is titled River Temperature. The question asks which choice best uses Patel's river temperature measurements to describe how the forested buffer affects water temperature. We have 4 data points: 19.2 degrees upstream of the buffer, 21.8 degrees just downstream of it, 24.6 degrees after the river leaves forested land, and 27.1 degrees Celsius 10 kilometers further into open pasture. Each choice makes a quantitative claim about the buffer's effect. We need the option whose numbers match the readings, and whose interpretation reflects what those numbers actually show about warming through the buffer versus warming beyond it. B reverses the readings. 19.2 degrees Celsius is upstream of the buffer and 21.8 degrees is downstream, so the temperature rises across the buffer, not drops. C claims the buffer prevented any increase, but the data show a 2.6 degrees rise through it. D says the 10-kilometer downstream temperature was lower than inside the buffer, yet 27.1 degrees Celsius is clearly higher than 21.8 degrees. Choice A is correct. Across the buffer, the river warms from 19.0 degrees Celsius to 21.88 degrees, a rise of 2.6 degrees Celsius. After leaving forested land, it climbs from 21.8 degrees to 24.6 degrees Celsius, a 2.8 degree jump, then to 27 to 2.5 over 10 kilometers. The buffer slows but does not eliminate warming, exactly what A states. Question 14 of 25. Another tough one. This passage is titled Tufu Lyric Style. The passage describes Tufu's lyric poems written during the Anlushan Rebellion, noting that even when depicting war and famine, the speaker refuses both ornamental excess and theatrical despair. We need the word that best captures this dual refusal. The choices are restrained, exuberant, experimental, and fragmented. The blank must name a quality consistent with rejecting ornament on one side and refusing theatrical despair on the other, a quality of disciplined moderation. B. Exuberant contradicts the text. Exuberance is ornamental excess, the very thing the speaker refuses. C. Experimental has no support in the passage. Nothing suggests Tu-Fu breaks with established form. D. Fragmented confuses refusing theatrical despair with being broken into pieces, which the passage never claims about the poem's structure. Choice A. Restrained fits exactly. The colon introduces a definition. Refusing ornamental excess and refusing theatrical despair together describe restraint. A restrained handling of grief is one that pulls back from both flamboyance and melodrama, which is precisely what the passage attributes to Tu-Fu. Question 15 of 25. Staying in hard territory. This passage is titled Nägeli and Mendel. The passage describes how botanist Carl Nägeli reacted to Mendel's findings, failing to recognize their importance for over a decade and steering Mendel toward hawkweed, a plant whose reproduction was guaranteed to obscure his results. The question asks which word most logically and precisely captures Nägeli's attitude. We need a word that fits someone who underestimates a discovery and actively redirects the researcher toward a doomed experiment. The blank must capture both the underestimation and the active redirection that followed. B. Protective would suggest concern for Mendel, but steering him toward an experiment doomed to obscure his results is the opposite of protection. C. Envious implies jealousy, yet the passage shows underestimation, not rivalry or covetousness. D. Ignorant suggests unfamiliarity, but Nägeli received the findings directly and then brushed them aside. He wasn't unaware, he was unimpressed. Choice A. Dismissive fits precisely. Nägeli not only failed to grasp the importance of Mendel's work, but pushed him toward a plant guaranteed to muddy the patterns, that is, active dismissal, treating the findings as unworthy of serious attention. Question 16 of 25. Back to an easier one. This passage is titled Chef Leah Marchetti. The passage contrasts Chef Leah Marchetti's famous elaborate tasting menus with her home cooking, which is described as a single pot of beans stretched over 3 days with whatever bread or vegetable is on hand. We need the word that captures that contrast. The blank must describe cooking that is plain, repetitive, and stripped down, the opposite of elaborate restaurant fare. The choices offer austere, ornate, experimental, and communal, so we want the term that matches simplicity and restraint. B. Ornate means heavily decorated, which is the opposite of one humble pot of beans. C. Experimental implies trying new combinations, but the meal is unvarying and repeated for days. Using leftover bread is convenience, not experimentation. D. Communal suggests shared eating, yet the passage never mentions other people joining her at the table. Choice A. Austere fits precisely. A lone pot of beans eaten for 3 days with miscellaneous leftovers is the very definition of austere cooking. Simple, plain, and pared back. It also creates the logical contrast the sentence sets up with her elaborate tasting menus. Question 17 of 25. Stepping up to a medium. This passage is titled Andalusian Poetry. The passage describes how medieval Andalusian poetry crossed linguistic boundaries, with Hebrew poems modeled on Arabic originals and Arabic verses doing something with refrains first written in vernacular Romance. We need the word that captures that cross-linguistic borrowing. The 4 options are incorporate, criticize, ignore, and translate. Each implies a very different relationship between the Arabic verse and the Romance refrain, so we need to match the passage's framing of poets borrowing freely across linguistic lines. B. Criticize breaks the parallel of borrowing across lines, introducing judgment rather than absorption. C. Ignore actually reverses the passage's point that poets borrowed freely. D. Translate implies a one-to-one conversion between languages, but the passage describes a refrain woven into a new verse, which is incorporation, not translation. Choice A, incorporate fits because the clause is parallel to modeled on an Arabic original. Both halves describe one tradition taking material in from another, and incorporate names that act of absorbing a Romance refrain into an Arabic verse directly and precisely. Question 18 of 25, still in medium territory. This passage is titled Sora Park's Memoir. The passage describes dancer Sora Park, who after injury began choreographing pieces built on deliberate stillness so intentional that audiences sometimes mistook it for something else. We need the word that names what that mistaken reading would be. The blank must name a misreading the audience could plausibly fall into when they see a motionless performer. The key signal is the word mistook, which means the substituted quality has to be something an untrained viewer might wrongly assign to deliberate non-movement. B. Exhaustion suggests a physical reading of fatigue, but the passage frames the stillness as a choreographic choice, not a bodily limit. C. Rebellion isn't a mistake an audience would naturally project onto quiet on stage. There's no defiance cue. D. Elegance isn't a mistake at all. Park would welcome viewers reading her stillness as elegant, so it can't be what they wrongly perceive. Choice A. Indecision fits precisely. A dancer standing still can look to a casual viewer like a performer who has frozen because she doesn't know her next move. That is exactly the kind of error the passage describes. Purposeful stillness misread as not knowing what to do. Question 19 of 25. Now it gets harder. This passage is titled Anya Volkov on Free Speech. The passage distinguishes two rights philosopher Anya Volkov says are often confused: the right to speak without state interference, and a second right defined after the dash as having one's speech amplified by a private platform. We need the word that names that second right. The dash is doing definitional work. Whatever fills the blank must equal having one's speech amplified by a private platform. So we're hunting for a word that captures reach or audience, not legal shielding, not negative reception, and not manners. B. Protected actually names the other right Volkov identifies, freedom from state interference, so it collapses the very distinction the passage draws. C. Criticized describes negative response, but amplification by a platform delivers audience, not critique. D. Polite refers to manners and isn't framed as a right anywhere in the passage, so it can't be what the dash defines. Choice A. Heard fits exactly. To be heard is to have an audience receive your speech, which is precisely what platform amplification provides. It also creates a clean contrast with the first right, freedom from state interference versus reach to listeners. Question 20 of 25, a medium after that. This passage is titled Late Landscapes. The passage contrasts a painter's early landscapes, which pile up dozens of distinct features like barns, fences, creeks, and trees, with the late works which show only a single field of light interrupted by one small dark shape. The blank must describe the late paintings. We need a word that captures radical reduction, many elements stripped down to almost nothing. The choices offer spare, crowded, decorative, and violent, so we want the one that names visual emptiness or minimalism. Choice B, crowded, describes the early canvases packed with dozens of features, not the pared-down late ones, so it reverses the contrast. Choice C, decorative, suggests added flourish and ornament, the opposite of the reduction the passage emphasizes. Choice D, violent, has no support in the text, which discusses light and quantity of features, not aggression or force. Choice A, spare, fits exactly. Spare means stripped down, minimal, lacking excess, precisely what a canvas with one field of light and a single dark shape conveys when set against the cluttered early work. Question 21 of 25. Now it gets harder. This passage is titled Jonas Reuther on Fanon. The question asks which choice best describes the structure of the text, which summarizes critic Jonas Reuther's essay on Frantz Fanon. The opening notes that Reuther quotes Fanon's famous lines and then asks whether quoting them serves the philosopher at all. The rest of the essay supplies Reuther's claim that those passages have hardened into slogans and must be read fresh. The choices describe 4 different shapes: posing a question and then answering it, defending Fanon against criticism, tracing the history of Fanon scholarship, or identifying a tension and refusing to resolve it. We need the option whose 2-part shape matches the passage's question, then answer movement. Choice B misreads the target. Reuther critiques a practice of quoting Fanon, not a wave of criticism leveled against him. Choice C invents content, since the passage offers no history of Fanon scholarship from the 1960s onward. Choice D fails because the essay does resolve its opening question by arguing readers should approach the famous lines anew, so no tension is deliberately left hanging. Choice A fits exactly. The first sentence raises a question about a critical practice, whether quoting Fanon's familiar lines does him a service. The second sentence delivers the essay's answer. Those passages have become slogans, and serious readers must approach them as if unquoted. That is a question about a critical practice followed by the essay's response. Question 22 of 25, a medium after that. This passage is titled Helena Volpe's Memoir Structure. The passage describes how Helena Volpe's memoir opens with painstaking room-by-room detail about her childhood house, and only at the very end reveals that the house was demolished 40 years ago. The question asks what function the second sentence serves within the text as a whole. The choices range from a reframing of the opening detail as preservation, to claims about a difficult childhood, a critique of architecture firms, or a statement about the memoir being written entirely from memory. We need the option that explains how the second sentence reshapes our reading of the first. Choice B fails because the text says nothing about hardship, only about descriptive detail and demolition. Choice C invents a target the passage never names, no architecture firms appear, and no critique of demolition practices is offered. Choice D overreaches. The sentence explains why the description matters, not that Volpe relied solely on memory, and the passage never makes that methodological claim. Choice A is correct because the first sentence presents dense description without a stated motive, and the second sentence retroactively supplies that motive. The house no longer exists, so the memoir is its last record. That transforms what could read as sentimental nostalgia into a deliberate act of preservation, which is precisely what A captures. Question 23 of 25. Now it gets harder. This passage is titled Student Writing Article. The question asks about the function of the third sentence in a passage describing an article that presents 3 sample undergraduate essays, each paired with a brief italicized caption rather than a general theory of effective writing. The options frame the sentence as either identifying a deliberate method, criticizing an omission, explaining sample selection, or commenting on caption length. We need to match the sentence's actual rhetorical work to one of these descriptions. Choice B misreads tone. Describing a choice as deliberate is not the same as criticizing it, and the sentence carries no negative judgment. Choice C points to selection methodology, but the passage never discusses how the samples were chosen from any larger pool. Choice D claims the sentence evaluates caption length, yet the brevity of the captions is never assessed as inadequate or otherwise. Choice A is correct. The third sentence states that the author lets the samples and their captions do that work, which presents the absence of a general theory not as a gap but as an intentional approach. That framing identifies a deliberate methodological choice by the article's author. Question 24 of 25, a medium after that. This passage is titled Restrepo's Dance Opening. The question asks for the main rhetorical function of the third sentence, which reports that Restrepo refuses to explain his choice publicly and says only that the audience's response is part of the piece. We need a choice that captures how this final sentence relates to what came before, namely the sharply divided critical reaction described in sentence 2. The right answer should describe a rhetorical move, not introduce content the passage never mentions. B fails because the passage offers no political context at all. The sentence concerns audience response, not politics. C is wrong because the speaker is Restrepo himself, not a rival choreographer, so no counter-argument from an opponent is being introduced. D misreads the sentence entirely. Nothing is said about how the 12 dancers were trained to stand still for 4 minutes. Choice A fits precisely. By quoting Restrepo's claim that the audience's response is part of the piece, the third sentence reinterprets the split reaction set up in sentence 2, some calling the opening tedious, others disciplined, as an intentional designed feature of the work, rather than a flaw the choreographer needs to defend. Question 25 of 25. Last one, a medium. This passage is titled Adebayo's Field Journals. The question asks for the main rhetorical purpose of a short text describing how naturalist Olu Adebayo structures his field journal entries. Weather and time first, species second, because he believes an animal is never observed apart from its conditions. The choice is split between describing Adebayo's method and the reasoning behind it, recommending his method to others, cataloging species, or drawing a comparison with earlier naturalists. We need the option that captures what the passage actually does, not what it merely mentions in passing. B is wrong because the passage explains Adebayo's reasoning, but never urges other naturalists to adopt his approach. C fails because no species are named, described, or ranked by frequency of study. D is incorrect because the text never references any earlier naturalist, so no comparison is drawn. Choice A is correct because the text identifies a specific methodological choice, recording weather and time before the species, and then ties that choice to Adebayo's underlying view that an animal cannot be separated from its conditions. The passage links method to belief, which is exactly what A states. That's all, 25 questions for Module 1. Pause the video and count up how many you got right. If you found this helpful, like and subscribe. I post full walkthroughs like this for every practice test. Good luck on test day. You've got this.